education, local government issues. Those are sort of my focal points. We have a lot of folks back at the office that deal with a wide range of other issues. Again, from taxes, we've engaged in a lot of criminal justice issues recently. But I also spend a good chunk of my time dealing with members of the General Assembly. We like to educate them, obviously, as to what not only do our reports and things like that say, but what's going on out there. What makes good sense for good public policy? And so I spend probably 75% of my time working with them to make sure that they have the information at hand so that they can make better, more liberty-minded policy decisions.
Good morning. My name is Tom Zawistowski, and I'm a guy just like you. And I happen to be the president of the We the People Convention and executive director of the Portage Tea Party. And we also have a PAC, the Ohio Citizens PAC. Basically I rely on guys like Greg and Maurice to advise me so that I can help communicate to you ways that we can be effective in defending our liberty. And I have a radio show that I do called Tea Party Talk with Tom Z. That's on the air right now as we speak, 640 WHLO in Akron, but it's available online at teapartytalkwithtomz.com. And I'd ask you to tune into that. The archives are available at any time, video archives, I stream it live. And the reason I ask you to tune in is not because I need the viewership, it's because that's how I communicate to you what the Tea Party movement in the state is doing. And so basically, I'm just a person like you who loves liberty and loves my country and will do whatever it takes to defend both.
Maurice Thompson, and I'm actually surprised I don't recognize most of the faces in the room. I expected to recognize almost all of them. I run the 1851 Center for Constitutional Law, which I started in 2008, and we are a nonprofit constitutional rights firm. I litigate cases protecting business owners' rights, property rights, and taxpayers' rights. So most of my work is dedicated to constitutional litigation and working with Tom to ensure that Hillary Clinton is our next president.
Goodbye.
Hello, I'm Garrett Kehr, one of the state chairs for Ohio of Young Americans for Liberty. For those of you that aren't familiar, Young Americans for Liberty is the largest, fastest growing pro-liberty student organization in America. We've got just over 700 chapters and 200,000 student activists across the country. 35 of those chapters are here in Ohio, which makes us one of the larger states in the network. What we do, we're sort of the party, if you will, engaging on college campuses on different issues pertaining to personal liberty and economic liberty. One of the big things that's going on in our state and across the nation right now is Yale's Fight for Free Speech campaign. You may have seen giant beach balls floating around different states or different campuses across the state. If you're tuned into social media, we're really challenging those repressive speech codes on America's college campuses right now.
Did I tell you we had a nice cross-section of leadership? I mean, this is a fantastic group. So as you were filing up here, I kind of prefaced the very first question, and I think it would be remiss if we didn't tackle it first. So, presidential year, divisiveness within the movement. The title of the panel is What Citizens Can Do. So I'm interested in a quick diagnosis for whomever would like to share of where the liberty movement is right now vis-a-vis the national scene and what's going on in the presidential race. So whoever would like to chime in.
That's a very interesting question. It's a question we've been grappling with literally for the last year. Many of you know that the liberty movement was very divided by the Trump-Cruz situation. One of the things that we did at a state level, and I say we, I'm talking about leaders like Glenn Newman, the president of the Ohio Liberty Coalition, John McAvoy, who's the head of the Northwest Conservative Coalition, different leaders across the state, Cheryl Blakely and Kirsten Hill and George Marmaroff, people like that. One of the things we decided to do was to let it play out. Our goal was not to tell you who to vote for or what to think. Our goal was to provide you with information and then listen to you and listen to what you had to say. I will have to say, flat out, I was a Cruz delegate. I actually helped recruit all the delegates that Cruz had for the state of Ohio. I will also tell you that the Tea Party movement in Ohio recruited all the delegates for Ben Carson, for Marco Rubio, for Donald Trump, for Ted Cruz, and anybody else that we felt was semi-acceptable. Because one of the games that's been played that we've learned through the legal process over the years is that, for instance, when Rick Santorum only lost by 4 points to Mitt Romney in Ohio, and it was not winner take all that year, he didn't have any delegates to represent him at the convention because his staff didn't know that they had to do it or how to do it. And to give you some idea of how fun that is, I think our filings for one delegate to have one candidate like Cruz to have all his delegates, I think it was 350 pages long, okay, to have your delegates. It's a real fun process. So where are we right now, to answer Bill's question directly? We basically have taken a position where it's not about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, it's about us. It's about our issues, it's about our advancing our issues. And we have decided that Donald Trump gives us a better opportunity to advance our issues than Hillary Clinton or Gary Johnson. That being said, I'm very excited at where we are as a movement right now as far as our goals and our issues, because I, for one, and again, we're speaking frankly, we're at the Republican Liberty Caucus, but I, for one, do not believe we should have only two parties. And I have supported the Libertarian Party in Ohio, and I think what was done to them is just unbelievably disgusting. And so I'm kind of excited that Gary Johnson is in, because from my standpoint, if you look at the polling, that he's taking more voters from Hillary Clinton than he is from Donald Trump. And so my wish, what I hope to wake up with on November 9th is that Donald Trump has won, Hillary Clinton has finished second, and the Libertarian Party has qualified for federal funding for future elections. That would be a great turnout, in my opinion. That would be a great result. And then I will close with this thing to just say, Donald Trump is no savior. We don't need a savior. The only ones going to save the United States of America is we the people. And I can tell you this: the only way the war ends on November 8th is if Hillary Clinton wins, because from my opinion, it's over. If you get a chance, I would ask that you read this book, The Intimidation Game by Kimberly Strassel. This will tell you the real state of our nation. And the fact of the matter is, our entire federal government is corrupt to the core and is coming after you. And their goal is to silence you and to take away your free speech, your First and Second Amendments. And I thoroughly believe that a Hillary Clinton victory will do that. If we are fortunate enough to win and elect Donald Trump, the fight will just begin, because the establishment is going to just destroy him. And it's going to be we the people who are going to have to stand with him. And I think, and I'll be interested to hear the next panel with some of our House members, and I'm interested to hear Warren Davidson, who's a great guy who just won his congressional primary and hopefully is going to win here. And because what's going to happen is between this January and 2018, we're going to expose a lot of the people we've put in office who will betray us, and we're going to have a real job on our hands in 2018 to throw a bunch of them out, because we're not going to get anything done in 2018. We're going to fight from 16 through 18, just trying to get in a position to restore representative government and liberty. So that's the way I see it, both statewide and nationally. That's kind of our orientation. Tea Party Patriots just came out and endorsed Donald Trump this week. I thought Ted Cruz just endorsed Donald Trump yesterday. So people are coming to a similar decision.
Anyone else care to? Greg?
We don't directly do politics, because we're a nonprofit, 501c3, which is a tax code thing. I won't worry with all the details. But policy matters and rights matter. And something that Tom brought up, in fact, this book, The Intimidation Game, that he mentioned, is actually a very important thing for everybody to understand. We're seeing this with think tanks and with other liberty-minded organizations. And Tom can tell you a lot about what happened with the IRS. I know everybody in this room knows what the IRS did, and that there hasn't been, at this point, a real reckoning. I know there's some efforts in the U.S. House now to try to deal with the current IRS commissioner, but truly, it's appalling how the use of federal power in that sense was used to silence people. But make no mistake about it, there's efforts consistently to try to, for example, disclose donors to nonprofit organizations. Attorney generals from multiple states, and I think even the Virgin Islands of all things, which is technically a U.S. territory, have tried to file things like with Exxon, for example. They've been trying to push all emails with any organization Exxon's ever done because they're claiming that Exxon is coordinated with all these nonprofit organizations to be climate denial people. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get information about donors. They're trying to pass laws in multiple states. I think there's even ballot issues in South Dakota and several others. There's been efforts to do this. And you know, we always talk about transparency. The Buckeye Institute, we're huge on transparency. We were the first, I think, organization that I'm aware of in the state that did public databases for salaries of the state employees and teachers and things like that. If you go to buckeyeinstitute.org, we have a new website now, but we have our salary databases are still there. And actually, the Treasurer of State has done a great job with that as well. But transparency is great in the public arena because it's tax dollars. It's your money. It's all of our money. And we need and have every right to know where that money is going. But when you're talking about a private donation that a private person makes, that's not the same thing as tax dollars. Also, we know that the left will attack people for what they donate to. We've seen it in multiple examples. And interestingly enough, one of the first big cases that I'm not a constitutional law guy, but I remember that one of the big things, it was in Mississippi or Alabama, I think it was Mississippi, but the NAA, one of the big things that led to donor privacy was actually the NAACP. Hey, Alabama, okay, thanks. Because what really happened was people wanted to disclose donors to the NAACP so that they could actually, unsurprisingly, this was kind of in the civil rights era and everything else, but they wanted to target people who were giving money to the NAACP. They wanted to intimidate people. So this was and so the Supreme, I think it was a case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court at the time, and that defended the right of privacy. Well, now, quite frankly, the political left is trying to overturn that for everybody. And this is bad. Obviously, it's going to be bad for anybody in the liberty movement. Candidly, though, it could be bad for people on the left, too. And that's a point that we've made. You know, I mean, if you disclose certain information, you could have people targeting people and things like that. So this is a huge, huge issue. And the sad fact is, if we don't defend this kind of personal privacy, we have a real problem. So that's actually one of the things that is at stake as we look at these elections. Is these are the issues that are important. So I encourage everybody. This is imperative. It's a good book there, but I think understand the magnitude of that issue alone, and then also as you work towards of this election and other elections, understand all of the issues. And you know, organizations like us and other organizations like some of the other think tanks in Washington and great liberty-minded groups, we want to provide information so that you can make your own decision. Our job is not to tell you who to vote for. We would never say vote for or against an individual person. But look at the issues, look at what seems to work, and then base your decision upon what you think is good information.
I would take kind of a different angle at the issue. I think the question is basically a question about Trump. Is the question on the table, and I'm going to give a schizophrenic response. The first half of the bipolar response is judicial appointments matter a great deal to what I do, and therefore to you. Your rights are actually your rights are defined by God prior to government because they're natural rights endemic in your humanity, but they're nominally protected by our state and federal constitutions. And something like, I think the number's like 68% of federal judges are non-Democrat appointees. You know, this is kind of a predictable reaction. You know, when Republicans give us somebody like George W. Bush, you're going to have an 8-year backlash. And I think the same thing would have happened if McCain would have won. And the long-term consequences of this are judicial appointees. And I'm not just talking about the Supreme Court. I'm talking also about all of the appellate courts and the district courts. Because what I do to litigate for your liberty and for your basic rights and your economic liberties does require oftentimes that a judge sign off, you know, issue an order saying, yes, you have that right. Republican appointees are not inherently good on these issues. You know, they're 50-50. There's been a war over judicial philosophy within the Republican Party for the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 decades. And for the most part, social conservatives who are progressives have won that war and implementing a policy of judicial restraints that is basically born of progressive philosophy, an idea of deference to the other branches that is undue and unexplicit in our Constitution, even here in Ohio where judges are elected. So we face our own challenges within the party on those issues. Nevertheless, we know what we'll get with Clinton appointees, and we know what we've gotten with Obama appointees. Trump, one thing that you can say in his behalf is he at least put out a list of judges he would appoint, which is something that no presidential candidate has ever done before. I'm familiar with many of the judges on that list. You know, Don Willett was on that list, who is a Texas Supreme Court judge who is very libertarian, very engaged in the protection of constitutional rights. So, I think that irrespective of where you come out on other issues, not just the Supreme Court, but the other judicial appointments certainly mitigate in favor of supporting somebody like Trump. Again, I'm not speaking for the organization. We don't support our opposing candidates either, like Buckeye, we're a 501c3. But then the second half of the bipolar response is there is far too much myopic focus on the federal government. Every day that you spend watching Fox News upset about the federal government, you could be doing something tangible to impact state and local government, which is violating your rights in the exact same way. Everything any of you have complained about Barack Obama doing, John Kasich has done to you at the state level over the last 6 years. You have no idea how horrible of an Attorney General Mike DeWine has been over the past 6 years. You have no idea how many government Marxist lawyers he has not fired from the Cordray era. Cordray stacked the deck with a bunch of socialists and Marxists and anti-business left-wing lawyers at the Attorney General's office. There's 800 of them, and most of them are on the opposing side of my cases, so I've gotten to know them. So I know where they come out on these issues. They honestly think they're protecting the public. It's pathetic, and you know, the war against your constitutional rights is very much alive and well here in Ohio, and it's very much, you know, these guns are being turned against you by other Republicans here in Ohio. And there is a lot that you can do about that at the state and local level. And I really think that for a group like this, your comparative advantage, like for any organization, is focusing on what you can control. So obviously find out what your passion is, but find out what your comparative advantage is. And I really think it's the state and local level. So, you know, going and pulling the lever for Trump or whatever is one thing, maybe doing a little bit of activism in that behalf, but to the extent that you do that and overlook what you can tangibly actually accomplish at the state and local level, I think you're making a grave mistake. Don't get caught up in the cable news cycle. You know, there's very little media exposure of state and local politics, state and local issues. But there's a great deal that can be done, and if you can find these moneyball approaches, you know, these undervalued assets at the state and local level, things like judicial races where not many people vote, you know, a group like this could be extremely impactful, and I'd be happy to help with that. A group like this could be extremely impactful in initiative and referendum, and a number of other issues. Maybe we'll get to that later, so I don't want to go too far down that hole. But that's the second half of my bipolar answer is the judicial appointments are important, but focus state and local because you can actually have an impact.
I do want Garrett to weigh in on this question as well, but I'm going to give him a more targeted response. I'll just briefly mention as we kind of pivot, because I think that's a perfect segue, Maurice, to move to what we can control better, which is the state and local piece. To finish up kind of on the national stage, the Republican Liberty Caucus of Ohio, for those folks who aren't aware, has been around since 1991, had their biannual convention an even number of years last year, so it was at the beginning really still of the presidential primary election season, endorsed Rand Paul closely with a Ted Cruz very close number 2, and has declined to endorse further. And the reason why is because we're struggling as an organization, just as everybody is struggling with an organization. Our Ohio board is evenly split as to the level of support for Trump. And I think that's indicative of the entire population of the liberty movement. So it's that's not just us. So I'll hand it over to Garrett to not only answer that question, but to kind of pivot just a little bit we have white men on the stage, a lot of white men in the audience, a lot of older folks in the audience. I'll talk to myself, sorry, I'm not indicting anybody here. But Garrett, given the, the part of the effort that you are a leadership in, please feel free to weigh in on kind of the national scene in the presidential race, but pivoting more towards an issue of making this movement more diverse, both from an age perspective as well as all elements of diversity. I'm kind of interested in what you're hearing, so if you want to answer on the national stage, but then also moving to just activism and what it is that we can do, I'm interested in your take.
So after Rand Paul dropped out, that was a pivotal moment for Young Americans for Liberty as well. Yale sort of has a unique perspective through our organizational history on the presidential election cycle. We were actually founded in 2008 after Ron Paul did not become president, unfortunately. So Yale was built off the momentum of Ron Paul's campaign. That's something we have a lot going for us right now, even with all the diversified opinions on Trump and the election in general. There's a lot of activism, a lot of movement going on in this election cycle. So I think the most critical thing for our movement, the Liberty movement in general, is to just capitalize on that, capture that energy, and make sure we don't lose it after November. That's the biggest thing we can do, is just keep pushing forward even after this election cycle is over. Even if a pro-liberty candidate doesn't win, we still need to keep everybody on board. In terms of regarding sort of the diversiveness of our movement, that's something that really gets overplayed a little too much. This summer, I had the opportunity to intern with Young Americans for Liberty National Organization in DC. I got to see some of our numbers. And our national convention was very indicative of this. We really get played out that stereotype that, oh, it's a bunch of white dudes hanging out and talking about how much they hate the government. But really, we don't give ourselves enough credit. This room perhaps may not be a stellar example, but when you break down the demographics of our movement, we really are nearly identical to the population as a whole. Clearly, the percentage points are off marginally, but grand scale over the entire nation, this movement is becoming more diverse. Our message is getting out there. The big reason behind that is just keeping that energy, making sure we get out there and doing different things to get that message, because this message is not exclusive to white people by any means, or white males in general. And then to go on that last point, the best way to get that message out there, to bring in more people to these ideas, is that continuation of activism. A lot of people, not to belabor the point, but do tire out. They tucker out, they leave politics after the election cycle is over, and that is the worst thing we can do, because the people on the other side don't. I spend a lot of time on college campuses, and it's been almost sort of interesting. This year there hasn't been an uptick in left-leaning groups on campus. It's been flatlined. They always have a presence. They just reorganize during election season. But that isn't always the case with liberty-oriented right-wing organizations. They tend to just focus on campuses during election cycles, which is a major loss. There's so many students, so many young people, so many different people with different backgrounds that we can reach if we just get past this notion that only the election years matter. So something anyone can do is just continuing that activism, whether that's a local Tea Party, a local Republican club, a liberty organizing organization, just continuing that message past this November and making sure it gets to as many people as we can.
So I'm going to want to pivot to exactly what we should be doing, which is the title of this panel. But let's stay on who for a moment, if we can. How do we broaden the tent? So let's keep on this issue of just bringing people in, not just in election years, as Garrett said, but across the board, having diverse folks in the movement, folks who are sitting on their buns today, but we need to get motivated to be part of the movement. Let's talk more about who, both the diversity as well as just getting people motivated.
Well, I can start and say this. The message of the free market, which is what we believe creates prosperity, should be heard perhaps more in the African American community than any other community in the country. And that included, if you look at the numbers, the statistics, which we do all the time, Bureau of Labor Statistics, you look at the unemployment rate for African Americans, particularly young African Americans, between I think about 16 to 24, it's well over double what that is for any other community. And if you look at the labor force participation forgive me, I'm a think tank guy, so I'm a little wonky on some of this, but what that basically means, that's actually more important now than the unemployment rate. Every time you see the headline saying what the unemployment rate is, understand that the unemployment rate only counts people who are considered active, either working or actively seeking work. If you aren't looking for a job, you aren't part of that unemployment number. You have dropped out of the labor force. So the labor force participation rate is actually a far more important number now. It has been ever since the Great Recession back in 2007, 2008. And the African American numbers are off the chart. That means that we need a message, and I think the free market message is the right message. It's a message of opportunity, upward mobility, moving people into chances to succeed, whether it's starting your own business. We talk about entrepreneurs a lot, but I get it. A lot of people don't think in those terms. But what about just getting a job, just not having, for example, not having an occupational license? We had a stupid thing in Ohio. This isn't even federal law. We had a thing in Ohio where you, in order to manage a salon, you had to have a salon manager's license. Now, you were a cosmetologist. You've gotten your base cosmetology license. And then you had to get an extra 300 hours of education and pay for it, I might add, of course, usually, unless you went to a career tech center. But most people go to private schools to do this and pay maybe $15,000 more and 300 hours so they could be a quote-unquote manager. If you didn't have that license and you were active doing managerial duties and the State Board of Cosmetology came in, they would have dinged you and dinged your boss for having it there. So you had to have this. It was mandatory. Ohio was the only state in the country that had that requirement. We've had it for like 40 years. And finally, Senator Chris Jordan, who from Delaware was a sponsor, as well as Democrat Charlita Tavares, and then there was a couple of really good, Christina Roebner at the House, and I think it was Alicia Reese, another Democrat, African-American from Cincinnati, were the sponsors of the two bills that eventually got rid of that. It's a great example, actually, of conservatives and liberals working together on a policy that was a no-brainer. But it took decades to get us there. But that was that was something that hurt and disproportionately hurt minorities and folks that are working class. And those are the kind of stories, those are the kind of changes to policy that we have to be able to just communicate to folks, especially the African Americans, so that we can say, this is what's happening to your community. These are your numbers. This is a message that can play. So when we talk about diversity and trying to bring people in, I think there's a lot of ways to do it. But one of the ways is understanding that we have solutions that can solve the problems you are dealing with. These aren't superficial solutions and things that just might make you feel better today and have some kind of a cathartic moment. These are solutions that'll get you jobs. These are solutions that'll help you move up. It's not about raising the minimum wage, which will really only mean that less people get jobs, and we start putting kiosks in all our fast food restaurants so you can order from a kiosk instead of a person, which is what's going to happen if people get their way on that stuff. It's about, how do you have opportunity? You want to succeed, right? We have the answer for it. And quite frankly, the progressive movement and the progressive policymakers, they don't have it. If they did, you wouldn't have a labor force participation rate that's so pathetic, and you wouldn't have over double the unemployment rate of everybody else.
Tom, you've been doing for a long time, recruiting folks to this movement, recruiting folks to run for office, things of that nature. Is it as Greg says, that it's very much in order to bring the who on, you have to have the right what?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And one of the things that's really exciting about this election, as bizarre as it is that there's this new coalition forming. And so we are actually fighting, for our own issues, to elect Donald Trump, to protect our own interests. And what we're seeing is, at the NRA call center in North Canton, there's 5 union guys there making phone calls to gun owners. We have, coal miners, steel workers, police officers, safety forces people, along with Tea Party people. And you mentioned, the racial issue. Okay, listen, folks, if you haven't heard it, go listen to Donald Trump's speech in Wisconsin after the situation in Milwaukee and listen to his words. And I put out a statement after that. I think that if he is elected president, that will be one of the greatest speeches ever given by a president of the United States. I've waited my whole life to hear anyone in politics say the things that Donald Trump said that we all know are true about the urban community, about blacks in our society, and with the inherent racism that we have, our institutionalized racism that does not include them in our world, to give them a fair shot at the American dream. And so when Donald Trump says school choice, man, that's the key to the door. School choice. Your money should be your money. It should follow your child to wherever you want to go. And a free market solution education, folks, is the #1 thing we need. Okay, so when you hear that, jobs, when you hear that, that's why the Democrats are in such a tizzy. That's why they're so frightened, because somebody who says he's a Republican is actually saying the things that no one would ever say, because they've already been bought off. I send out with my radio show promo tons of PDFs. Basically anything that's on the radio show I back up with documentation and I send it out. And so this week's show, I sent out an article from Politico. And it said, the title of the article, so you can look it up, says, Donald Trump does have ideas and we need to listen to them. Is a very profound article. Now again, Politico, half the time I think they're a leftist rag, then they come up with something like this. What this article basically says is it ain't Donald Trump at all. What's going on is that the post-Cold War progressivism that started in 1989 has finally taken its course, and it's falling apart because it's a flawed idea, and that's this one world government nonsense. And Brexit, as well as this election, has a lot to do for it. And they talk about 6 things that Donald Trump stands for. But to put it as simply as I can, is in this article they talk about the one true American invention is pragmatism. Donald Trump is not an ideologue. Everybody we've had for 50 years or more has been an ideologue, right? They have this philosophy they're following. Donald Trump is like me and many of you. I'm a businessman. I go into work, I see that we have a problem with the server, I figure out what the problem is, and I make sure I get it fixed, and I look for the next problem. That's Donald Trump. And so what this election is about is pragmatism versus progressivism, okay? Pragmatism works, progressivism fails, okay? It's a flawed ideology. Now, as far as how does this manifest itself, as Garrett was saying, about continuing to fight even after the election. The one group that's been there forever, day in, day out, is the Tea Party. We just don't go away, all right? Maybe we're not smart enough to go away. Maybe we can't afford to go on vacation. I don't know what it is. But we sure haven't done a lot of that. But I'll tell you right now, what Maurice was talking about from the first time I met him, and because I'm stubborn Pollock, it took like 4 years for him to get it to me, is you got to start small. Ann Becker is sitting here. Ann, raise your hand. Where are you? You were just sitting there. Ann Becker's back there, and Ted Steveno. They were part of what is probably the most important thing we did, and you need to be part of. And that was the Ohio Precinct Project. You know, when this all started, everybody at the Tea Party wanted to run for president. Okay? Oh, I'm going to run for president, or I'm going to run for governor, or senator, or whatever. And here's what we found out. We're not big enough or strong enough for that. Matt Lynch is sitting right here, running for Congress. We've made some great runs at it, don't have the money to do it. Chris Sawicki's here, he's run for House, okay? Didn't have the money to carry it off. We need to pick the fights we can win. The first fight you need to win is County Central Committee. Period. End of discussion. You can only reform the party from that ground up. Then you start electing township trustees and school board members. Then you move to county commissioners and county positions. So we kind of had our cart before our horse. And so what we've learned is to think small. And I even had this conversation with Adam Brandon from Freedom Works one time after he was visiting, and we were talking about what works and what doesn't work. And what we found is pretty much the biggest, apple we can take a bite out of is an Ohio House race. Ohio Senate is just too big for us right now. And so that's what our focus is on, is reorganizing and taking this new coalition, okay, these people who believe in pragmatism, who believe in the institutions of our society, okay, and what they're saying is they believe in their country, and they believe in their own self, responsibility for taking care of their self. And so we've got to pull these people back together and then start to implement that at the local level and then move it up the ladder, and then you'll see real change. So that's what and that's who. The who is us.
That was a fabulous segue, and I'd ask, Maurice and Garrett, who I think are very well positioned and from very differing perspectives, but very much grassroots, as far as, let's continue with the what now. We've got a half hour remaining on this panel. Specifically, what marching orders should these folks be taking from today's session as far as where they can get involved and what specifically they can do? Whichever you'd like to take it.
Okay, I'm going to start more general and holistic and then drill down to answering that question a bit more specifically. In deciding what you can do specifically, what I'm first going to tell you is perhaps what you shouldn't do, and that is, I don't want to disagree with Tom on his advice about Central Committee or some of these other things, and I'm really more thinking about things like federal races and even state rep and state senator races when I'm saying this, or other statewide election offices, but playing politics isn't going to work for you. One of the most important books, I've read all this stuff over the years, maybe most of you have too, what you believe, been through everything that Rothbard or Mises or Hayek or Milton Friedman or Frederick Bastiat's ever written, and only to learn at the end of the day that my impulse towards liberty is far more gut-driven than that. It's far more driven by my Christian understanding that everybody is given an individual identity by God, and to lord one man over another is to dishonor that identity, and it's much more driven by that sort of honor and respect understanding, and really an anti-bullying impulse that a lot of us have even as children when we see that might should not make right, whether it's on the playground or all the way up through government when it's some code enforcer telling you what you need to do to your house. And that applies to police officers as well, by the way, since we were speaking about advancing diversity. I mean, these are government union employees at the end of the day. And it seems as though Republicans are eager to scrutinize other government union employees, yet turn a blind eye when those employees wear certain kinds of uniforms. And I think that that's a terrible mistake. But generally speaking, find out what informs your version of liberty. So I found what it is for me, and then find out what you are, one, passionate about, two, where your comparative advantage is, but three, find the David versus Goliath approach. So what I was getting to before, to drill down more specifically, is one of the more important books that I've read about liberty that isn't about liberty in the last year is Malcolm Gladwell's book, David versus Goliath. Has anybody else read that? It's a great book in providing tactical concepts for our movement, because Goliath was a giant and he fought with swords. Politics is a stacked deck, people. So it's a rigged game. So if you want to play politics against politicians, you know what? Maybe you're really good at shaking hands, smiling, kissing babies, and lying. But there are people in the state house already who are also really good at that. So don't play that game, because it's a stacked deck. Don't fight Goliath with a sword face to face. Fight him with a slingshot from 100 meters away, or whatever it is. So you need to find your version of David's slingshot. It has to be a different, innovative, kind of a undervalued tactic or approach that's not currently being utilized. Don't play politics. That's my first piece of advice on how you might actually advance freedom at the state and local level. With the caveat about what Tom had to say. And then drilling down specifically, I see a number of areas of undervalued assets that also, by the way, feed into the second question about creating diverse coalitions. And I have to preface this with the understanding that I'm not a conservative. I'm a libertarian Republican, which is different than being a conservative. And I'll tell you the reason why. I'm going to ask for you to show hands on this issue. There are essentially two views, and these are both crude. There are two different views of human nature. One is that people are inherently maybe not entirely capable. They're not entirely responsible or intelligent enough to care for their own lives or businesses. The other is that people are inherently capable and responsible. So I want to ask for a show of hands. How many of you think that people are, for the most part, inherently good, wise, capable? And how many of you think that they're inherently not? You know, more than not. Okay. So I think that the latter group that's the more conservative approach, and I think that it has the capacity to tear down coalitions rather than build them up, because you have to be humble enough to understand what people are capable of other than yourself. I think the government view is one of paternalism, the idea that if we don't have a regulation forcing people to pay into Social Security, they will not save for their retirements. They're just not smart enough, which of course is an ironic philosophy, because the assumption is that every voter is smart enough to vote over everybody's retirement security at the same time, right? So it's inherently irrational, and we see it in our education policy at the state and local level. We see it all the way down the wire. So let's talk about issues that don't require, you to sort of dishonor the intelligence of your fellow man. Let's talk about policies that allow people to opt out of things that they should be able to opt out of, that aren't currently being paid attention to. All too many Republicans are voting yes for tax levies, criticizing federal government spending, scrutinizing every dollar that's being spent, yet not doing the same thing for their school districts or for their cities or for their counties. And there are very weak and very poor, if ever, organized efforts to stop tax increases, much less to initiate lower taxes, which can be done or through initiatives. So if you want a specific item that fits my criteria of finding a Moneyball approach, a David versus Goliath approach, and not playing politics, get involved in these local tax issues. At minimum, you're going to meet new colleagues and broaden your tent, because I worked to defeat the Columbus schools levy with my primary colleagues in that effort was the black community. They were upset that the city of Columbus was shifting all of this money to things like Nationwide Arena, basically corporate welfare for billionaires that black people never use. They don't go to hockey games. Why are poor black people funding rich recreational sports that white people go to watch? It's disgusting, frankly. And this happens over and over again. Corporate welfare is a great opportunity of fighting taxes by pointing to that corporate welfare at the same time. And these tax issues really broaden the coalition, because all you're asking is for people to opt out. Look, if you think taxes should be higher, you can still pay those higher taxes. You can make a voluntary donation to the school district or to the city or whatever it might be. So we're not saying that you can't do it. We're just saying that we should have the right not to do it. And that's true of a lot of the issues that we're working on. Stopping forced government rental inspections, point of sale inspections that really hit minorities hard, eminent domain, obviously. But I would really urge a focus on initiative and referendum, because that's a game that's not being played by candidates. The tax issues, and also, again, I just go back to judicial races. Something like only 40% of people who vote go all the way down the ballot to vote on the judges. So if a group like this can develop a coherent checklist and a guidance on state and local judges who are supposed to be the original and first line of defense for your constitutional rights, tremendous opportunities there. So those are three specific areas. And again, remember that David versus Goliath allegory. Don't waste your time trying to fight giants with the same swords that they're using.
Garrett?
Going off that, I've got three quick points to hit, going back to some of the issue-specific things that we can do to broaden the coalition, some more broad stuff that I think applies to everyone, and then some more pointed marching orders, if you will, from my background with Yale. Really going back to the occupational licensing, that is a terrific example. Last fall and the fall, or spring before that, Yale had launched a documentary program screening, blanking on the name, film, discussing occupational licensing and how it affected marginalized communities. And we did that at my home university, Capital, down the street a little bit. And it was crazy, the turnout, the results, the discussions that started. A female student of color who self-identified as a Marxist came up after seeing some of our flyers and kind of approached me and said, why would you care about an impoverished black woman trying to run a hair salon? I said, well, why wouldn't we? We love freedom for everyone. It's not exclusive to any class or race. And really got to start that meaningful discussion on what free markets are about and how that impacts everyone. So find those specific issues, maybe resonate with a different community than we see before us today. Stuff like occupational licensing, criminal justice reform, issues with the police state that have harms for all of us, but especially impact those marginalized communities, because that's a great way to start those dialogues. More broadly speaking, what everyone in this room can do, I think we can take a lesson, something that Yao likes to instruct our new student leaders with. Hayek had a pyramid of production. We like to sort of implement that in activism. There are places like the Buckeye Institute, intellectual think tanks that come up with these ideas, that do the research. And they really show us what we should think. And we, as a movement, sort of get that. We understand the ideas. Maybe that's not all of our comparative advantage, but we need those people to make sure we have the ideas to articulate. There are authors, writers at that next level of the pyramid that can break it down even more, make it palatable for us so that we can see it, we can understand it. It's not so much complex, not so much the data, but getting closer to that gut feeling that you brought up. And then the level underneath that are the actuators, the grassroots activists, people in this room. That's my humble opinion, the most important part. We take those palatable ideas and we get them to the masses, because that's really where we have the biggest impact. I think everyone in this room, broadly speaking, that's probably our comparative advantage. It's just making sure those messages get to the streets, get to everyone, have those meaningful discussions, because that's really where progress is made. The next level is that voting block, getting those ideas to critical mass, making sure our ideas are as popular as they merit, because we should have the most popular ideology on the block by a mile. Just making sure everyone's on the same page with those. And the very last block on the pyramid is the hardest to attain, but so really not something we should be focusing on at this point, are those elected officials that actually vote. That's the hardest one to get to, but it only happens if everyone plays their block in the pyramid. So don't focus on something that isn't immediately attainable, that isn't our comparative advantage, but work towards what we can do. And lastly, when people ask me how to get involved, it's usually a room much younger than this. Tell them to go to yaliberty.org and find their campus's chapter. And clearly that's not something a lot of people can make use of here. But there are so many groups out there locally. I was amazed when I stumbled across the Ohio Liberty Coalition's website. Groups all over the state. Don't be afraid to reach out to these new groups. They're always looking for new people, and I'm sure most everyone in this room is already involved. But share those groups with other people. Bring your friends, bring your relatives, anyone that reaches out. I was brought into the Liberty movement when my grandfather just bringing me to a campaign event. That helps. I mean, that brings the next wave of people in. So never hesitate. Don't think, oh, my cousin, my grandson, my neighbor doesn't want to hear about my kooky libertarian Republican ideology. It might change their lives, and they might go on to change an untold number of lives. And that is how we win as a movement. It's just broadening that base.
So we started with who, then what. I'd like to finish up. We just have a few minutes remaining, so so briefly a little bit about how. And the Republican Liberty Caucus of Ohio was organized to try and be that how. One of the areas that we're going to be talking about this afternoon is how to build those local affiliates that will actually take what you've been saying and be able to put it in practice, because it's got to be in the local communities. Whether it be county central committees or the issues and the levies that are germane to a specific locality, that's what we want to do. So as a last topic, with the last few minutes we have remaining, what advice would you give to an organization like the Republican Liberty Caucus of Ohio trying to build grassroots affiliates of this organization to bring this coalition that Garrett was just talking about to fruition, to life, how would you advise us that we go about embarking upon that? Whoever would like.
Well, I'll just start by saying one of the things that we want to provide at Buckeye students is information. We're not able to get involved in some of the apparatus of how you build your actual grassroots coalition and stuff, but what we want to give is ammunition, and anybody can use it. It doesn't matter to us what party affiliation somebody has. I see Senator Jordan actually over there, who I mentioned earlier today, right before he came in, because of the salon manager bill. He's the sponsor of the legislation that got rid of that stupid idea that Ohio had for decades. So a truly winning thing there. But here's what we need information. We will provide, and we can provide information for everybody. And I've talked with Maurice at some length. I think the local stuff that Maurice is talking about is extraordinarily important. I would actually go so far as to say that in some sense, some of the problems that Ohio has is at the local level. We have some really weird things that we do in Ohio at the local level that nobody else does, and we have out of control spending at the school district level, at the city level, and quite frankly, even at the township level. We have weird decisions that get made about building the newfangled fire department building. Do you really need that? Do you need a new pumper truck? Can you share a pumper truck with a neighboring township? How do you do that? Can we figure out more competent things to do? But we will provide the information so that people can have it. And if we can't directly get it, we'll tell you how to get the information. Data is there to help you create the basis for whatever argument you want to make. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, data makes most people's eyes glaze over. So at some level, you got to hit people with a gut punch, an emotional punch. Unfortunately, when we talk about some of these tax issues, sometimes the gut punch is, unfortunately, the other side uses it, right? They're like, it's for the kids. I mean, how many times have you heard that on that campaign? In fact, is there any other thing that they ever say other than it's for the kids? I know, I mean, it's yeah. So it's a terrible thing because it's an advantage that they have, but through good, solid data on what spending is and where they're making decisions, and usually you'll find that the decisions that are being made are oftentimes being done in ways that aren't fiscally responsible and aren't necessarily going into the classroom. I mean, I think a lot of people would say, well, if we were spending money in the classroom, we felt like we were getting the value, right? Then we might feel a little differently. But nobody feels like they're getting that value because there's money that's being siphoned off for administration, siphoned off for building Taj Mahal, sometimes new buildings that maybe are more above and beyond, not just above and beyond, but way above what's necessary. Whereas what might make more sense is to get more newer books, better in the room technology. There's a whole bunch of things. So we want to get the information so that you can be empowered, because that's the first step. Is every single citizen should be empowered with a reasonable, digestible amount of information. That's one of the things that the Buckeye Institute wants to do. And then folks like Maurice, folks like Tom, and folks like Yelf, we can all work. They can work with hopefully some of that information to operationalize it. So we could come in kind of from that 30,000-foot view to give you ammunition or arrows in your quiver, so to speak. And then I kind of turn it over maybe to Tom to go to the next step.
I appreciate this question because I have some very direct advice for you. Experience, is the best teacher. The single biggest mistake the Tea Party movement made from the very first day is that we didn't raise money. Period. This is a business. The reason the Portage Tea Party, which I'm the executive director of, is one of the most successful tea parties in the state and in the nation is because the very first meeting I said, we're going to charge dues and you're going to fund this. And so we had money when others did not. Okay? So here's the bottom line. You can't do anything we've talked about unless you have money. And that money can't come from the same people who give money to the politicians, because they're giving that money to get something from those politicians that you don't have. Okay? That money has to come from the grassroots. And I really found it ironic and interesting that when the Tea Party movement started, we're all supposed to love free markets and capitalism, and our people wanted to, tar and feather somebody because they made a few bucks on a bus trip. The people I compete with every day The people I compete with every day make $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 a year. I make nothing. For 8 years, I've been working 80 hours a week for nothing. We've lost 70% of our personal business in 8 years. We've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight for liberty. Now, I'm not stupid. That's a choice I made. But I've also made clear to everyone in the Tea Party movement that without money, you're never going to win, because you need skills. You need skills. And I found it ironic, I think this week, Sheldon Adelman from Las Vegas and some of the billionaires have jumped in and they're going to finally give Donald Trump some money. And you know what I said? Keep it. You're just getting on the bandwagon because we've worked so hard to turn the tide for him, and now you want to buy some influence. Keep your billions of dollars. It's real simple. The people we fight, all their money they have, they take from us. So how can we not have as much money as them? So my advice to you is to raise money first so that you can have the organizational structure to act. One of the single biggest problems we have is we have no access to the legal system. If it wasn't for this guy sitting next to me, we would have zero legal advice. And he donates it to us. There may be, I don't know, 3 lawyers in the state that I can talk to. Maybe 3. I won't tell you, because they'll be disbarred or something. I can't say. I'll tell you that whisper you later. But here's the bottom line. You need legal counsel. That costs money. And so if we can finally organize like a business, and I'm not talking about, you're giving thousands of dollars. I'm talking about, the last survey taken in Ohio shows that 24% of registered voters in Ohio support the Tea Party movement. That's 2.3 million people. If they were given $10 a year, we would be cleaning up in all these races. Instead, guys like our representatives here, Becker and Jordan, can't get any money to do anything. Okay? So my first statement to you is fundraise. Build that base that's consistent, then use that to organize, then pick the targets that you can be effective with, because that'll help you raise more money. Right? Everybody loves winners. So win. Sounds like Trump. Okay? So that's my bottom line to you guys. That's what the Tea Party did wrong. That's the Portage County Tea Party did right. But basically, we have to fix this, particularly if Donald Trump is fortunate enough to be elected November 8th. We've got to fix it because of the battle that lies ahead. So that's my advice to you.
I guess I've been doing this liberty movement thing for as long as anybody maybe in the room at this point, having started 1851 8 years ago. It makes me kind of an old man in the room. So I have a little bit, I guess I've seen a lot of liberty groups, a lot, come and go. I've seen a lot of regime changes at liberty organizations in Ohio, sometimes annually. A lot of our liberty groups look like the Cleveland Browns. Every year or two there's a head coaching change and a whole new game plan and a new quarterback, and you can't even keep track of the names in the back of the jerseys after a while. So one thing, based on Greg and Tom's comments, and Bill's question, there are 3 things that really jump out to me. The first, and I'm going to disagree a little bit with Tom here. Well, not entirely. The first is the tension between education and organization on the one hand, and action on the other. I believe that you take action first, and that you use that action as an opportunity to educate and to organize. So the Healthcare Freedom Amendment was an opportunity for us to build an organization behind a spear point that was an action item. And I think that the reason that a lot of the organization exists is because we took action first, without much of an organization in place, with like 8 people in a room. There are too many people. Education about liberty is like the new MLM. It's multi-level marketing. Everybody wants to educate everybody else about liberty, and nobody wants to do it. And it's like, well, I'm going to educate somebody, then they're going to do it, and that person's going to educate somebody else, and they're going to do it. And you know what? Nobody ends up doing it. Right? Doing it looks like spending, 3 weeks for me, alone in my office on a laptop or whatever, doing research and writing a brief that ends up, protecting somebody's property rights. Doing it is not easy. It's hard. That's why people don't want to do it. But you need, and for a lot of people with the healthcare freedom, doing it meant getting clipboards and go out and getting signatures on rainy days, on corners and in front of post offices. And that's even harder. That's a lot harder than sitting, in an office. No doubt about it. And that's heroic work. That's doing it. But you need to take action first. You guys already know what you believe. And I think you probably already know why you believe it, or you will. And what's been missing from the liberty movement is not the education piece or the organization piece. I believe it's the action piece. And I believe if you take noble and principled action first, that then the organization can be built around that action as you go and later. And not only that, moreover, speaking of money, that the money will come. I represent people pro bono. I don't charge legal fees, but a funny thing has happened along the way, and that is that I figured out that when I win certain kinds of constitutional rights cases, state or local government are forced to pay my legal fees. And outrageous fees too, like $400 an hour is my statutory rate that the government has to pay me if I win a First Amendment case or something like that. Or if I tax is found invalid, and the government has to refund all of that, I get a small percentage of that. Most of the money goes back to the taxpayers. It's a very good deal for them. It's a good deal for everybody. And this money adds up. So at first I was representing people entirely for free, and I still am. And there was no financial angle. But we're set to bring in about $1 million in legal fees that the government is forced to pay us this year, and we're set to do the same next year. And all of this is because I just started out doing something for free. And all this money is a nonprofit we plowed back into the liberty movement. And the way we're going to do it, which I think ties into Bill's question, is we're starting a program where we'll provide matching grants to local organizations that want to fight taxes. So if you guys are going to spend $1,000 on the ground, we'll give you $1,000, and not just that, but we're going to do the research on how much your overpaid local superintendent who demands the tax increase is making, what his benefits look like, how much some of the teachers are making, what your administrator ratio might be in that district, or whatever the issues are. And we're not afraid to use populism when we do that, instead of just using the stoic data. So, there are things that, my board told me, maybe you should hire more employees, maybe you should take a bonus or something. But I think that this whole constitutional rights scam, that I'm doing here, I can plow this back in and help you guys. So this is kind of like a hydrological cycle at the end of the day, in a crude sort of way. So, contact us if you have a local issue. Not only can we represent you in court, not only can we help you organize structurally to some extent. I don't like to do much of that anymore. But we now are in a position, because we've gotten good at what we do, which was taking action first and for free, remember, gotten good enough at what we do that we can actually help fund you. And maybe someday you will be taking action for free, and maybe 8 years from now you will be a benefactor, somebody in a position to help fund others doing the same. So there's a couple hopefully tangible things in there.
We just have about 1 minute remaining. Poor Garrett. Sorry, buddy.
I've got two quick specific homework assignments for everyone using student terminology. One, I think Tom really hit it home. You can't change the world, you can't pay the bills. That's definitely always something to keep in mind. But second, so who all is a leader in a liberty group back home? Show of hands. Gotcha, so a fair amount. Something that I really struggled with starting a student group, that really had to overcome to broaden it, is bring in more people into leadership. The future of this movement doesn't belong to tired political hacks that gave us endless war and unsustainable debt. It certainly doesn't belong to the vast populism which has really become pungent this election cycle belongs to those principled leaders that can help change this country. So it's our job to identify them and then get them involved with the leadership. That creates that buy-in that we need. We need those new leaders. The rollover in this room is really going to be dramatic over the next couple of years, so we have to keep bringing in fresh people. So go back to your groups, go back to your organizations, find those new people and get them a title, get them involved, and make sure they're here at the next convention.
I don't know about you all, but I heard new stuff, and I'm glad it's being recorded because I'm going to go back and take my notes later. So a round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much, gentlemen.